to enable DevOps. This is likely going to be fun. You just started adopting Kubernetes, or maybe you already adopted Kubernetes and you need a tool that will make all the things happen. The tool that will simplify the experience of you as a sysadmin, of you as a developer, or SRE, or whatever your role is. What we are going to do is explore a very strong candidate that can help you in your Kubernetes journey. And that tool, platform, UI is called KubeSphere. KubeSphere is a very extensive platform that does a lot of things. And we are yet to discover whether it does them right or not. So let's cut to the chase and go directly to KubeSphere and then comment while we are discovering how it works. I already created a Kubernetes cluster where I will run KubeSphere, and here comes the first problem, potential problem. KubeSphere is very hungry on resources. You need a lot of CPU and a lot of memory. I'm using a local Kubernetes cluster with 4 GB of RAM and 3 CPUs. That is, in my experience, the minimum you should have to run KubeSphere alone. And on top of that, you will need whatever additional resources you need for your applications. So the minimum requirement, at least in my experience, is 4 GB of RAM and 3 CPUs. And that's kind of heavy, right? Most of the similar tools are using less memory, less CPU. You will see later why it is heavy. So I'm about to install KubeSphere, and installation is relatively straightforward. All I have to do is execute 2 kubectl commands, and that's it. And now it's all about waiting until it is fully up and running, and while that is happening, we are going to take a look at the logs and see what's going on. If you're familiar with Ansible, you will see that those logs are Ansible logs. KubeSphere installation is using Ansible to bootstrap itself, and that is kind of silly, right? Almost nobody is using Ansible anymore to deploy their applications inside Kubernetes, and especially not as the operator pattern, right? So we have an operator in that cluster, or operator looking something that is using Ansible to install everything else. But that's implementation detail, as long as that does not interfere with how KubeSphere works and how we upgrade KubeSphere. I don't mind that there is Ansible. That's their problem, not mine, as long as that is not interfering with my usage of KubeSphere. Now, the annoying part here is that it takes a hell of a time to install KubeSphere, and that is due to the linear progression of their Ansible scripts, the installation itself. It does not start all the processes at once, but it goes one by one. Hey, I need to do this, I need to do that, and then I will do this, and then I will proceed to that, which is kind of silly in Kubernetes, because we know that the best thing to do is to just start all the processes at once, and they will figure out dependencies between themselves and what's or not. But it's not such a big deal. I can wait for 10 minutes or whatever it takes for the first installation. But the real question here is, can we trust a community, a company behind KubeSphere to help us manage our Kubernetes cluster if they're using the tools that predated Kubernetes? Shouldn't KubeSphere use operator model, the real one, or kubectl, or customize, or maybe Argo CD to install itself? Nevertheless, we are going to see whether that interferes or no later. Based on the output, we can see that there is a specific address we can use to open KubeSphere web UI, and this is the web UI. I need to log in first. There is a predefined username and password. I'm going to use it. That's the one from the output. Potentially, the most important thing about KubeSphere is its RBAC. We can use it to define users and groups and permissions and who can do what, and that would be probably important part of the review, but RBAC, at least in KubeSphere, is relatively complex, relatively complicated. It would take a lot of time to go through it, so I'm going to skip. You just remember that KubeSphere can be used to manage your users and the groups and what's or not. It's a bit old-fashioned in how we managed RBAC in the past, but nevertheless, it can be a good tool if you need to manage permissions. Now let's go to the platform. We are going to skip cluster management for now and go directly to access control and see what we'll get there. The first thing you're likely going to do with KubeSphere, apart from setting up users and groups, is to create a workspace. Workspaces are kind of a strange thing. They allow us to create some logical units, and inside of those units will be projects, and projects are basically namespaces, but they're not called namespaces, they're called projects. Anyways, workspaces are a way to group projects, and we want to do that so that we can give certain permissions to certain people to operate on certain projects, and all those projects would be inside of a workspace. So I'm going to create a new workspace and call it whatever, some my workspace, for example, because I'm not creative today. And then I'm going to create a project. Project is a glorified namespace. I do not understand why it's called a project and not a namespace. Why do people need to invent new names for the things that already exist and are well recognized and understood? So project is a namespace. I'm going to create one right now. And we can do quite a few things within those projects. We can set storage, we can configure it, we can set up monitoring and alerting, which is Prometheus behind the scenes. One interesting thing we can do within projects or namespaces, remember, project is a namespace, silly, isn't it? We can set resource quotas and limits and default resources and default limits, you know, the things that you can normally set in namespaces, but in this case we can do it through a web UI. KubeSphere basically does two things. It provides web UI to manage the things that you would normally manage in different ways in Kubernetes, and it integrates with some tools. It's just a graphical user interface to do things that you can do anyways without KubeSphere. But some people like clickety-click, so if you like clicking buttons and sliding things and so on and so forth, hey, this might be a good tool for that. We can also set a gateway, which is basically configuring an ingress that will provide host addresses for our applications. Now, if I go to my terminal and list the namespaces, we can see that there is my project namespace. That's basically the name of the project I created, and it proves that it is just a namespace, nothing else. Now that we have a workspace and a project, again, which is a namespace and a gateway, we can finally deploy an application inside that project. And to do that, we go to application workloads and choose apps. It could be other type of resources, but apps is probably what you will use most of the time. In app templates, we can deploy a sample app. I will not do that. That's just silly. We are going to go directly to deploy an existing application. And to do that, we go to composing apps. And you can probably notice that this was probably based on Docker in the past. And that's what makes it kind of weird. That's probably where projects and workspaces come from, because those things had to be invented when using Docker. And now we are using Kubernetes, and I'm guessing, I'm not sure, that KubeSphere transitioned from managing Docker containers into managing Kubernetes workloads. So let's give it a name, DevOps Toolkit, or any name we want, and add some services. Again, this is misleading. This is probably from Docker when we call them services. Services in Kubernetes are something completely different. That's how we do networking. But nevertheless, let's play along and create a service. We can choose a stateless service or a stateful service. I'm guessing that stateless would create Kubernetes deployment, while stateful would create a stateful set. That's my guess. We can check it later. I'm actually pretty sure that that's what's going on here. And then a name of the service, which will probably be the name of the container. We can specify the number of replicas and other typical things that almost every Kubernetes dashboard that tries to simplify management of applications is doing. And then comes the add container part. This is where we specify the image that we want to use for this application, or to be more precise, this service. And then we can specify other things. I guess that the most important one is to specify the ports that will be used to access the process inside of that container, which is inside of a pod, which is inside of a replica set, which is managed by a deployment. And you know, all the things that you probably know, but you don't have to know if you're using tools like this. They simplify the process that allow you to forget that you're using Kubernetes. It ends up being as complicated as writing YAML, probably. Nevertheless, for some people, it is probably easier to do click, 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 click instead of defining YAML. And if that's what you need, if you want a web UI that allows you to click, 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 then this might be a good thing. This is actually an excellent thing so far. We can add volumes and we can do advanced settings, and one of the advanced settings is internet access, which realistically should be basic. There is nothing advanced about having access to your applications. But hey, it's an advanced settings, and it's one that you almost certainly want to check unless your application is for internal usage only, some kind of a backend. But if it's a frontend, if it's customer-facing application, then this is not advanced. You need to check this. And then we add it, we click next, next, next couple of times, and our application is up and running. Or it will be up and running soon. Actually, there is one more important thing. We need to add the route to our application, which is basically the host we want to use and potentially the path to our application if multiple applications are using the same host. I will let it out to generate it for me. I'm already getting bored, so I want to go through this as fast as possible. And that's it. Our application is updating. Realistically, it is rolling out. That would be a better term, but hey, it's updating our application. It is doing something. It is making it run. And there's the address, auto-generated address through which we can access the application. I will not do that. I trust it probably works. Maybe it doesn't, but doesn't matter. Anyways, let's go and see other stuff because this is boring. This is what almost every similar tool does. Actually, let me see what it created. Let me output all the resources in the My Project namespace. And as expecting, it is not doing anything extraordinarily complicated. It allows you to do things through web UI that you would normally do easily through YAML or any other tool. It created a deployment, and that deployment created replica set and pods, and it created a service, and it created an ingress. Now let's go to cluster management and see what we'll get there. There are some graphs like cluster resource usage, which I'm not sure whether it's useful to anybody. If you want something really good, use Grafana connected to Prometheus. I was about to say, hey, it's good to have pretty colors, a lot of colors floating around, but it's pretty much black and white. There aren't many colors if that's what you expected, but there is a potentially useless graph that might amaze you. Now, KubeSphere says, hey, we can do much more than allow you to manage your applications through a Kubernetes dashboard that is the same like everybody else. We can make you do DevOps. We can enable DevOps in your organization, and that is going to be awesome. So let me update KubeSphere to enable DevOps. This is likely going to be fun. And there is no easy way to do it. There is no button that says enable DevOps. We need to go to CRDs and select the specific CRD and then edit that CRD. That's a bit silly for a tool that aims to simplify things. So I'm going to look for spec DevOps enabled and change the false value to true, and then I'm going to update it. This is not easy. This is just silly. But hey, maybe there is a better way to do it, I just haven't seen it yet. Now, since there is no visible indication what's going on, I can only assume that DevOps is already enabled. It took half a second to enable DevOps. I just clicked update, and that's about it. Now we are DevOps enabled, right? Well, let's check that. Let's see whether that's really true. And I can check that by going to the workspace and see whether there is a DevOps link on the left-hand menu. Let's see, is there DevOps? Did we get DevOps finally? There isn't DevOps. It's supposed to be there, but it isn't. So let's see what's going on. Let's take a look at the logs and see what's going on. Where is my DevOps? And how are we going to do that? By checking the logs, right? Doing the things that you normally wouldn't want to do with KubeSphere, because KubeSphere is supposed to simplify things, allow you to manage everything through a web UI, but it doesn't unless you really don't care what's going on. So let's take a look at the logs. And now we are faced with Ansible, right? It is running Ansible tasks, all of them, right? Even though I changed a single parameter, it is going through all the jazz, setting up everything, and this takes time. This takes a lot of time, and I'm getting bored with it, so I'm going to fast forward to the end of the very lengthy and boring process. And I'm going to ignore the fact that there is no visual indication inside of the UI that DevOps is about to be enabled, because it is not enabled. It will be enabled, but there is no indication about it, and that's just silly, because hey, if I'm using web UI, I don't want to go to my terminal to do stuff. I mean, in reality, I want to go to terminal and do stuff, but that's because I'm not a typical web UI user. The fact that it takes so long to change something that should be almost instant proves that running Ansible tasks sequentially to do every single change is just silly. That's not how we operate Kubernetes today. But hey, happy thoughts. Don't be depressed. Think positively, Victor. I'll go and do something and come back to this later. I've been away for a while. Let's see whether it's finished. And yes, it's finished. And do you know what we got? We got Jenkins. Now, I've been using Jenkins for many years, but hey, you're not going to call DevOps something that you put Jenkins over there and probably run some Jenkins pipelines that you've been running for your whole life. So here it goes. Here's the truth. DevOps is a marketing term used for KubeSphere to say we are running Jenkins. And that's not something you expect from a new hipster tool that is supposed to bring you to the next millennium, and it's supposed to give you the next leap in evolution to move you to Kubernetes while having all the old tools that you've been using in the past. There's Ansible, there's Jenkins, there's all the jazz that you've been using before Kubernetes, and now you want to package it in something and say this is Kubernetes native, this is enabling you to do DevOps. But as I said before, happy thoughts, calm down, let's go on. So let me go back to the UI and see, did I get that DevOps magical button or I didn't? Yes, there is DevOps. DevOps is enabled. Now, one thing you should know about KubeSphere is that every time you make a change, doesn't matter whether that change is directly related to KubeSphere or indirectly, it will update everything, and that includes the web UI, and your web UI will be down for a while if you make any update, if you make any change. And that's not how we do things in Kubernetes. I thought we are getting away from downtime every time I make any change. We're supposed to have zero downtime, everything always operational, maybe multiple replicas, rolling updates, what's or not. But that does not apply to KubeSphere. You make a change, you suffer downtime. And that also means that my user session was reset. I will need to log in again and do all the jazz to get back to where I was. So let's create a DevOps project. What is a DevOps project? I don't know, but let's try to find out. What can I do there? I can specify a name. Let's call it my DevOps project and go on. And then I can create a pipeline. This is nice. At least they're not hiding that it's Jenkins. Actually, they are hiding that it's Jenkins, but this is Jenkins behind the scenes, just with a nice UI. So I'm going to create a pipeline, give it a name, and then I can choose how many days to keep builds, what is the maximum number of builds. Those are all Jenkins settings. This is setting up Jenkins. And there is nothing wrong with Jenkins, except that they're trying to hide it and call it DevOps. But this is just Jenkins with a nice UI. Maybe they're doing something cool with it. Let's take a look. And I got my pipeline. It didn't ask me what that pipeline should be. Shouldn't it ask me, hey, what type of a pipeline you want or what do you want to do? No, it didn't do any of that. It just asked me for the name and a couple of silly settings. But I can edit the pipeline later. I can choose to do continuous integration or continuous integration and continuous delivery, or I can create a custom pipeline. So I'm guessing that CI and CD are just predefined pipelines that I will hopefully be able to fine-tune to my needs. Now, one thing I like so far is that this UI looks much better than typical Jenkins UI. You know, the one that comes out of the box. Potentially better looking than Blue Ocean also. And here's the pipeline. This is a typical Jenkins pipeline. It's very obvious. It gave me a bunch of steps. It didn't ask me what technology I'm using, what I want to do. It just gave me a predefined pipeline that in my specific case doesn't work because this is full of Maven. I'm not using Maven. There is nothing wrong with Maven, but I do not happen to use Maven. So instead of asking me a couple of questions to maybe get me closer to what I need to redefine this whole pipeline. This pipeline will not do any good for me. And it didn't even ask me what's my Git repository, so it's not even operational. I need now to go from step to step and figure out all the changes I need to make, and it makes me question whether this is more useful and whether this is more helpful than me just using Jenkins directly. If they gave me a wizard to ask me a couple of questions that matter, this could have been good, but it didn't. I'm failing to see the point of using Jenkins that is hidden from me and then called DevOps, which does not bring much additional value instead of me using directly Jenkins. And here comes the important thing. I either already have Jenkins, I'm using it, and then I would like to port my stuff here. Why would I use this if I already have Jenkins that is doing what I need it to do? Or you're not using Jenkins, but you're almost certainly using some form of pipelines and you want to reuse those pipelines. This is starting to sound silly. Now there are other potentially amazing things we can do with KubeSphere. We can have multi-cluster setup with KubeSphere. So let me go through the documentation and see what that really is. And here it is. It's KubeFed. It's Kube Federation. That is abandoned project. Community behind Kube Federation is dropping it. It is replacing it with something else. Truth be told, there is no replacement yet, at least within Kubernetes itself, for Federation. But Federation is here to die. And this might not be the best thing you should do with your multi-cluster setup. And another cool thing, or at least KubeSphere says it's cool, is that we have App Store, right? We have a store with applications that we can just use out of the box and deploy to our cluster. So let's take a look. But it's not enabled by default. So if you want to take a look, we need to go back to CRDs, back to editing that custom resource definition, back to updating those changes which are not very intuitive, and then wait for an eternity until it is up and running because, hey, it's using Ansible sequentially updating absolutely every single resource, even though all I want is to enable a feature of an application that is already running. And don't forget that during this process, there will be moments when the UI will not be operational. And you will need to log in again because your session will be lost as well. So I'm going to go for a walk and come back. Okay, let's take a look. Is it finished? Yeah, it's finished. It took a lot of time. I didn't time it, but I was really, really bored and it was a long walk. But now we finally got to the App Store. It's in the top menu. We can just click App Store and get to deal with our applications. That's usually third-party applications. And there are a few of the commonly used ones like Elasticsearch, Redis, MySQL, and so on and so forth. Let's install something. Let's say Harbor, right? I want to install Harbor. So how do I do that? I click on Harbor. And I'm taken to a pretty useless screen that has the deploy button. I'm going to click the button because, hey, what do you do when you see a button? You click it. And you can define a couple of parameters. I'm going to skip through that and go next. And then there is a screen that gives me Helm values. So App Store is a collection of Helm charts with the ability to edit values file directly from the web UI. And that's it. Click, 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 and Harbor is up and running. So that's KubeSphere, right? It is a Kubernetes dashboard that claims to be DevOps by integrating with Jenkins and quite a few other tools. If you look at the tools, they are very enterprisey. They are very from 10 or 20 years ago. There is Maven, there is Jenkins, there is SonarQube, there is Nexus, Artifactory, some Git repositories like GitLab, GitHub, things like that. Standard things, and most of those things we've been using for many, many years. And those tools are not necessarily bad, but they're not necessarily really Kubernetes native. There might not be my choice if I would be starting from scratch, but there might be a great choice for all the big enterprise companies that want to adopt Kubernetes by using the same things they were using in the past, but now inside Kubernetes. So this is about adopting Kubernetes. This is not about embracing Kubernetes, and that's a very important thing. This will not help you embrace Kubernetes. This will help you lift and shift your things into Kubernetes and have the feeling that you're still doing the same thing just in Kubernetes and not wherever you were doing them before. So this is about adopting Kubernetes by lifting and shifting, and not about adopting Kubernetes by embracing it. And you will also notice GitOps word being repeated over and over in KubeSphere documentation. This has nothing to do with GitOps. This is not GitOps. Argo CD is GitOps, Flux is GitOps, and there are a bunch of other tools that are embracing GitOps for real. This is not GitOps. These are CI/CD pipelines that we've been using for many, many years, and there's nothing wrong with using pipelines. But please, please, please do not call it GitOps. Do not use all the popular terms because that would sell your platform better. There is nothing GitOps in KubeSphere except the name in the marketing material. Now, I might have sounded negative, but there are many good things about KubeSphere. It is good for big enterprises that want to carry along the tooling that they've been using in the past into Kubernetes. And KubeSphere is like integrator of all those tools. It helps us integrate the tools that we are most likely using. The question is only whether we want to continue using those tools or no. This is about lifting and shifting your stuff into Kubernetes. This is not about embracing Kubernetes. So if I would need to explain KubeSphere, I would say that it is a combination of a Kubernetes dashboard combined with opinionated pipelines similar to Jenkins X, and with the traditional looking RBAC. Imagine taking a Kubernetes dashboard like Lens, combining it with Jenkins, and stuffing RBAC on top of it. And then for the good taste, putting something similar to Bitnami KubeApps. So if you combine Lens and Jenkins and RBAC and KubeApps, you get something very similar to KubeSphere. Potential problem is that this is insufficient for ops and maybe too complicated for devs. It's somewhere in the middle. I'm not sure that ops people should use this, and I'm not sure that dev people should use it either, because it's too little for ops and too much for devs. It might be too complicated for those who do not understand Kubernetes, and maybe too simple for those who do. If the tool itself would embrace Kubernetes instead of fighting it, then maybe it would be a good tool for people who want to embrace Kubernetes. Right now it feels like it is mostly for people who want to lift and shift into Kubernetes. Still, KubeSphere might be the most complete solution of the kind. So if you're looking for click, click, click type of web UI to manage your Kubernetes and everything inside Kubernetes, and if you want integration with some tools, and if you want it to be a bit opinionated and a bit not opinionated, somewhere in the middle, then KubeSphere is a good solution. Now, if you're not into clicking, if you're not into opinionated frameworks, if you would like to create your own opinions, and if you would like GitOps for real, and if you would like Kubernetes native way to manage Kubernetes, then this might not be the thing for you.